How did I get my Seven Bridges Road mix to start here?
There are stars in the southern sky.
And end up sounding like this.
There are stars in the southern sky.
If you're curious how we made that, stick around for this video. You're going to want to hear more. Hey everyone, my name's Jake, and I just want to preface this with I'm very new to mixing. If you're someone who has a lot of experience mixing and like do this stuff for a living, you're not going to learn that much from me, okay? I'm very new to this. The processes that I use are just what I did for this specific track. I'm still learning all this as I go. So I just kind of wanted to share this kind of to document for myself if I ever need to look back at it, but also for people out there who are also beginners, who are also learning this stuff. And maybe there's people who are smarter than me who can teach me stuff that I'm doing way wrong because I'm just doing this the way that I'm just trying things. So we'll see how it goes. So let me start showing you basically what I have here. I basically, as you can see on my screen here, kind of worked through several different iterations of mixing these 5 tracks. So initially I went through and I recorded 5 different tracks. We have a low mid, a mid, which is the melody, a mid-high, and a high track, basically a 5-part harmony. And so this here is the original, as we can see. So this is the no mix. Let me play what I have for you here.
There are stars in the southern sky.
And so as you can hear, everything's kind of out of time. There isn't really a locked pitch or anything on this. So those were kind of where I started. When I did record these tracks, just for reference, I'm recording them on this microphone. I think it's an Audio-Technica AT2020. I just recorded them directly into my mixer using like one of these stereo in tracks, I think. And when I was recording these, I basically just had a recording track. I threw on these few things just to kind of get levels a little bit standardized to start. So let's look at kind of the settings on some of these things, just in case people are curious. All right, so for instance, we're gonna look at the high channel here. If we look at the gate, well, I tried pulling up the gate. For some reason, when I double click this, it's not coming up. So you're just gonna have to trust me that there's a gate. Basically, it's just making it so that really, really small like inhales and stuff like that aren't being picked up on my voice. I think it was set at like -23 decibels or something like that. I don't remember. Anyways, as you can see, I just put some really basic stuff on here. I think the limiter I had set to just something basic. Really, all these are just presets. You can see like the tube compressor I used is just male vocals just to kind of squish everything and bring everything to the middle. And then the limiter, again, is just to make sure that all of my vocals and stuff aren't peaking. So I basically put this on all the tracks just to make sure that all this stuff isn't peaking. Recorded all this stuff through my microphone for each of the different vocal lines and put them in here. When I did that, again, obviously all this stuff is not time aligned, not synced, etc., etc. So what's the first thing that I came in here and did? I wanted to go in and time align all these tracks, get all the words and stuff to line up. And thankfully, there's a handy tool in Cubase called Vary Audio. So if I select one of these tracks, let's just go with like the mid-high, for instance, and I go to my editor, I can actually see this guy here, Vary Audio. Let me actually pull this out into a separate window, and you can see kind of what I did here. So first things first is we needed to basically make some hit points for this audio track. That's what all these lines are. And really it's all just defined based on a percentage threshold, right? So you can kind of see those lines going up and down. Basically anything that it triggers is within these 2 lines and not like inside the 2 lines. It's going to trigger a hit point on that audio. So I just kept everything at 0. One thing to note that I messed up a lot is you do have to like Control A to select all your clip and then go ahead and create your warp markers, which I'm not going to do now because I've already done it, but you'd basically select everything, set your intensities, kind of take a look at all these and make sure that everything's kind of lining up. I just kept it at 0, create your warp markers. Once we have that, then we can go into, sorry, I've been saying Vary Audio this whole time, audio warp. And audio warp is the tool that you use to kind of move your tracks back and forth. All right, so we have all of our warp markers here. If I hit free warp, and I actually did have to go back through and hit the warp markers on my hit point because obviously I wasn't adjusting this before. And if I zoom in here a little bit, we can see basically all of these markers here. And so basically what you're gonna do is kind of add and remove markers and kind of drag these things around based on all of your notes. And the way that I lined these up actually was I used, so I'm just gonna pull this away for a second. I actually had these on 2 separate monitors. I would use this monitor here to kind of adjust my waveform, and I would use one of these tracks as my standard. So let's just say I use the low track as my standard. I would try to kind of line up all of my waveforms to make sure that they all look similar. This way you can kind of get the words to line up in that regard. And then obviously you need to use your ear also. Everything needs to sound like it's landing in the same spot. So as you can see here, everything's kind of jumbled up. I actually went through and did this. So let me open up the project where all of my waveforms are aligned. All right, so as you can see here, all this stuff looks probably better aligned. All these basically notes and stuff here. They're not perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect, but you can kind of see that all these things, when I move the time head, kind of line up a little bit better. So let me show you a comparison of the before I time aligned and then after I time aligned.
There are stars in the southern sky. There are stars in the southern sky.
So I mean, even just that quick view, you can hear how much cleaner this whole line is, right? Everything is lining up together. All the words are coming in at the same time. It makes it sound so much cleaner. So where do we go from here? Everything's aligned, but if you really listen to it, all of my pitches are all over the place. They're close, but they could be closer. So next is where we go into Vari Audio, which I confused with Audio Warp before. Now we're actually using Vari Audio. And what Vari Audio is, another tool built into Cubase, where you can actually adjust your pitches on each of your different samples to kind of tune your sound. So for instance, again, we'll go back into one of these tracks. Let me pull up the mid-high track for instance. We'll go to our editor down here at the bottom. Again, you could do it all here, but I just like to use a pop out. It's a lot easier to look at. So once you come into here, you're gonna go into this Vari Audio tab and you'll be able to hit this edit Vari Audio here. It's gonna process everything and kind of give you a timeline of notes on a piano wheel. So as you can see here, everything's kind of all over the place. So what I like to do first, and again, this isn't necessarily the best way, but what I like to do is select everything. So I do Control A is select all. It'll select all the notes. And what I like to do to start is just do a basic correct pitch on all the notes. I don't like to do it perfect because then you get too much of that auto-tune sound. And that actually comes more in the straight and curve line. So I really only go like 50% on the correct pitch and about 20-ish% on the straight and curve. And so you'll see kind of these things shift around as I correct the pitch, and then you'll see the curve of all these little waveforms actually flatten out as I straighten the curve. Like I said, I think more of that auto-tune sound comes from that straight and curve value more than the correct pitch value. If you want it more locked on pitch, you could probably bump this all the way up to 100%. But again, I like having that more natural tone. And with this project specifically, because it's a cappella, it's cool to kind of have that little bit of inconsistency. So again, it's all personal preference. Use your ears. Again, it all comes back to if it sounds good to you, then it's good. That's all you need to impress. So that's kind of how I start. Then I go through and actually look at all the notes of these tracks. So for instance, I'll solo this track, and I will go through and just listen to these, making sure that all the notes are where they're supposed to be, kind of move these around, cut them up, drag them where they're supposed to be, and kind of get a holistic view. So again, this is an old version before I actually did the current Vari Audio. So this is the old picture. Let me see if I can pull up the actual mix I have with the new mix. All right, so I pulled up the same track on my time and pitch project, which is where I went through and actually pitched all my vocals, and you can see here, this is a lot cleaner. I removed a lot more of those inconsistencies, basically made sure all of my notes are the same. And if we listen back to this, it should sound a lot cleaner. It might have a little bit of that auto-tune sound to it just because you're soloing a track. And when you solo tracks, everything kind of gets that auto-tune sound to it. But it should sound like every note is more consistent and more on pitch. There are stars in the southern sky. And so you can see there, like everything sounds a lot more locked on the pitch. It's still not perfect. Again, if you want to get that super auto-tune sound, you can crank up your pitch, crank up your straight and curve, and that thing will sound like auto-tune for days. But that's just a start. All right, so let's listen to kind of the holistic view from just time aligning now to doing time and pitch alignment and kind of hear what that difference is.
There are stars in the southern sky. There are stars in the southern sky.
So again, when you do that on all the tracks and make all the pitches align a lot closer, everything sounds a lot cleaner, a lot sharper. And again, you really haven't done anything in regards to like plugins. This is just cleaning up your vocals. And you can already hear how much cleaner it is. It's crazy. So the next piece actually comes to where you're using plugins to actually get the sound. Obviously, this is just a raw audio track of each of these, minus the gates and the limiters, but those aren't really adding effects. Like maybe you might want a reverb or a delay or something like that on these vocals. And that's where this next piece comes in. All right, and now we're to the last piece of the mixing. And as you can see, a lot has changed from our time and pitch to now this final mix. Basically what I did was I went through and removed a lot of the gaps of silence where there was this breathing, etc., between all these clips. And I also went through and actually made what's called group tracks. And what that does is basically groups all of these vocal tracks onto one single track. So for instance, I would basically come in here, right click, say add a group track, and basically I would just name this whatever I want. And then what I can do in each of these different actual vocals, and you can do this for anything. You can do this for drums, you can do this for guitars, you can do it for whatever. I'm just doing strictly vocals here because that's all I have. But when you go into your channel settings, rather than sending this to your stereo out, you're going to send it to the vocal group. And then from there, your vocal group, so if I open my vocal group, will go to my stereo out. And so basically, rather than, there's just an extra step kind of in between to getting to your actual output where you're hearing the sound. And what that allows you to do is kind of do bulk mixing on all these things, right? So like rather than throwing a reverb, for instance, on every single one of these tracks, I can just throw the reverb on the group track and it gets applied to all the vocals. And what that kind of does is kind of allows everything to get more cohesively glued together. Obviously, you do want to do your individual mixing on all of these tracks, but you can do some additional mixing to all the tracks together to kind of glue and kind of make everything kind of blend together a bit better. So let's go through what I actually did for my mix here. All right, so let's take a look at strictly the mixer, because this is where, again, I'm doing all my mixing, I'm adding all my plugins, etc. For all of my vocal tracks here, I basically added this frequency plugin, and I think for most of these, I just used default settings, right? I just basically, you can see here for the mid-high, I use this male bright EQ. So this is just an EQ of sorts that will like remove and add sounds, just to kind of change the color of your voice. I think some of them I used this lead 2 male, and I think some of the lower stuff I used a different one. So like, let's look at this low setting. Yeah, so I used this vocal 3 male dark. And it does say to adjust the notch. I don't know if I did. When they say that, they're talking about this. You can actually move this peak around, and I think you do that down here somewhere. I just use the presets. I know you can get a more dialed sound by actually moving these and really using your ear, but again, I'm new to this. I'm just trying to do the basics. Then next thing I did was I used a tube compressor on each of these. Is this the best compressor to use? Probably not. I just thought it sounded good, and again, just used a basic out-of-the-box preset for these tube compressors. So nothing crazy, just use your ears. So that's what I use for those specifically. Then when we go to our actual vocal group, that's where I actually put on my reverb. So, and actually I haven't even showed you this yet. I guess I should play you the actual track so you can hear it.
There are stars in the southern sky.
So you can hear after the track plays this kind of echoing effect, and that is the reverb that I put on these. And so what I did was I created effect tracks. Rather than putting the reverb directly on the tracks themselves, I created separate effect tracks to apply my reverb. And I have two separate reverbs, as you've probably seen already. I have a long reverb and a short reverb. So let's look at each of these. If I open my long reverb, I'm using a plugin called RoomWorks. And again, I think I just used a preset, maybe changed a few values. So if you want to copy my values here, I started with the room background Vox. And I think I may have adjusted like the reverb time and maybe a little bit of the pre-delay, but I think pretty much everything else is the same. One very important piece about effect tracks that I didn't know, and I just learned this recently. If you are going to use effect tracks, make sure that your dry and wet mix is turned all the way up to 100%. You want a full wet mix on effect tracks. That's not the case if you put them directly on your vocals, but because we're using these as a send through a group track, and we're using these effect tracks need a 100% wet mix because you're going to adjust that through the send value itself, which we'll talk about later. So for both my short reverb and long reverb, you're gonna see my wet mix is all the way up, and that is how it's supposed to be. All right, so that's my long reverb. So again, this is that long echo that you hear, and then I have another shorter reverb, which I can pull up here, which looks like I just used the room double preset. Might have changed some values in here. Again, make sure your wet is turned all the way up. And so when I went to apply this to my vocals itself, rather than sending this to my individual tracks, I just applied both of my reverbs to my actual group track. So if you look at the group track presets, you can see I basically used these sends as a predestination send, I think is what these set to. They're a post fader send, basically meaning that after they hit the fader, that's when these effects are going to hit. Does that mean anything to me? No, I don't know. I don't know what it does. It's just I literally clicked both of them and that's what sound better. So I don't know. I don't know anything about this stuff. And then I just kind of dialed these based on how much reverb I wanted. If you wanted more, you could drag this up a lot more. If you wanted less, you could drag it down. But I basically just wanted to apply these to all of my vocal tracks. And so this is how you get the same amount of reverb across all of your vocal tracks. And then secondly, I added a compressor, another compressor on top of my group track. And that's just to, again, I had compressors on each of my individual vocals, but this is kind of compress everything as a whole to kind of make it more of a cohesive unit rather than having all these little spikes. So it looks like I just put this light master thing on here. I think that's really all I did. And then lastly, and this is just the icing on top, it's not really necessary. Well, it probably is very necessary, but on my stereo out, so on the actual output you are going to hear, I actually added a razor. Most of the time I use a limiter, but in this case, my sound was too low. But really what I try to shoot for, again, I don't know if this is right, take my word as a grain of salt, but I try to shoot for an even sound of peak leveling at 0 dB. I don't know if that's right, but that's what I do. So for instance, we'll see here, basically what the razor is doing is my sound initially comes out too low. So this is boosting everything, and then everything that ends up over that is cutting down so it stays at the ceiling of 0 dB. In other cases, I've had mixes that were too loud, and instead I put a limiter on here and basically limited everything to a ceiling of 0 dB. But in this case, I actually needed the razor to raise my gain up and then hit my ceiling. So if we actually play the clip, you should see a pretty graphic here that shows kind of where it brings everything up and then all the stuff that it's cutting off.
There are stars.
So you can see this adjustment that it's doing, right? It's pushing the volume down because everything, once I do this gain, it's too loud, so it needs to bring it back down to that ceiling. But yeah, ultimately, that's what I did here for my mix. What I'd like to do now is show you the final product by actually breaking out each individual part and how they all come together cohesively at the end. So let's actually look at each individual vocal track and show you how it all comes together.
There are stars in the southern sky, southward as you go. There is moonlight and moss in the trees, down the 7 bridges road. There are stars in the southern sky, southward as you go. There is moonlight and moss in the trees, down the 7 bridges road. There are stars in the southern sky, southward as you go. There is moonlight and moss in the trees, down the 7 bridges road. There are stars in the southern sky, southward as you go. There is moonlight and moss in the trees, down the 7 bridges road. There are stars in the southern sky, southward as you go. There is moonlight and moss in the trees, down the 7 bridges road. There are stars in the southern sky, southward as you go. There is moonlight and moss in the trees, down the 7 bridges road.
So yeah, that's how I handled one of my first mixes. I think I've only done like 4 or 5 vocal mixes in my life thus far, and they've all been over the past like year or two. So I'm still learning. If you've found things here that you want to use in your mixes, great. I hope some of you learned something. I'm sure some of you look at this and you're like, how the heck is he doing this and making it sound as semi-okay as it is? Or you might be thinking, man, that sounds awful, because you're not doing all these things. And if you're one of those people, I'd love to learn from you. Put some comments down below. and help me learn some things, because I'm doing this by myself, just based on resources I find online, etc., etc. And I know there's way more people out there who are way more talented at this than I am. But I hope there's a few of you that learn something for anyone who's wanting to get into this stuff. And yeah, that's really what I wanted to make this for. I hope you learned something. This was a really fun process to go through this and actually make what I think sounds like a fairly decent, cohesive sound. So it was fun. It was a fun little project. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, I applaud you, because I'm sure this probably wasn't the most exciting video, but thank you so much for sticking around, and there will be more videos to come soon. Thank you so much, and bye.